Good afternoon. My name is Amy Bardak. I am the Director of Jewish Life and Learning at the Jewish Federation of Greater Pittsburgh. On behalf of the Federation, I would like to welcome you to this commemorative Torah study session. Today, we honor the lives lost and the people affected by the attack on 3 congregations, Dor Chadash, New Light, and Tree of Life, or La Simcha, on October 27th, 2018, the 18th of Cheshvan, 5779. Our Torah study today is dedicated in memory of the 11 people who perished on this day 3 years ago. Please rise if you are able as we recite their names. Joyce Feinberg, Edith Baltacha bat Abba Menachem, Richard Gottfried, Yosef ben Chaim, Rose Mallinger, Razel bat Avraham, Jerry Rabinowitz, Yehuda ben Yechezkel Veselma, Cecil Rosenthal, Cecil Chaim ben Eliezer, David Rosenthal, David ben Eliezer, Bernice Simon, Bela Rachel bat Moshe, Sylvan Simon, Zalman Shachna ben Menachem Mendel, Daniel Stein, Daniel Avraham ben Baruch, Melvin Wax, Moshe Gadol ben Yosef, and Irving Younger, Yitzchak Chaim ben Menachem. Zichronam livracha. May their memories be a blessing. You may be seated. If there are any members of the press here, please note that this session is off the record. I would like now to invite Dean Root, a survivor of the attack from Congregation Dor Chadash, to introduce our scholar, Rabbi Sharon Cohen Anisfeld.
Thank you, Rabbi Amy. It's an honor to introduce to our Pittsburgh community Rabbi Sharon Cohen Anisfeld, who is the president of Hebrew College, where she previously served as dean of the Rabbinical School. She's a graduate of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College, and she has spent 15 years as a Hillel rabbi at Tufts, Yale, and Harvard. She was named in Newsweek's list of the top 50 influential rabbis in America, and she's recognized as one of the 50 most influential Jews in the world by the Jerusalem Post. And we're really honored to have you join us and blessed to be able to share this time with you.
Thank you so much. It is really my honor to be with you. Can you hear me? Is the sound okay? Great. Okay. I'm really honored to join you and want to begin by just really echoing what Rabbi Amy said and in offering up the kavanah and the prayer that our learning together this afternoon will honor the memories of those whose yahrzeit it is, right? Today is the yahrzeit. May their memories be for a blessing. So the title, you may have noticed, the title that I chose for this session is actually from a phrase in Gershom Sholom's private diaries that we just recently published. And the phrase has sort of, I just learned it a few weeks ago. Somebody shared the diaries with me, and the phrase has really been, I've been kind of carrying it in my heart a lot and mind for these last few weeks. So the phrase is, longing is the mother of renewal. And I think it's a very rich phrase, but part of the reason that I wanted to use it as sort of the frame and point of entry for today's session is I think part of what draws me to it is there's something about longing that seems to hold within it both grief and hope at the same time. And I think that has something to do with why Shalom sees it as connected to the capacity for renewal. And so the questions that I wanted to explore together in the next 45 minutes or so, of course, the question, how do we move forward after tragedy and loss? How do we sort of befriend longing and all that it contains, both the grief and the hope that it contains? And how do we summon and strengthen our capacity, not only for survival, but for continual renewal? So those are sort of the questions I want to bring with us into the Torah, the text that we're going to be looking at together. And I want to look at those questions primarily through the prism of the journeys really that we're in the midst of now in our cycle of Torah readings, the journeys of Genesis, and in particular the journey of Abraham. And I want to juxtapose Avraham with the image of Lot's wife that is with us from just a couple of parshiot ago. So that's sort of the terrain we're entering. And I will share my screen. I have a source sheet that I'll share, and we'll move a little bit on and off it, because I also want to see people's faces and hopefully be able to have a little bit of hear from you, have a little bit of give and take. So, but let me begin by sharing the screen. And let's get up to the beginning. Okay, so the place I want to begin is a place that I think will feel like familiar terrain. And that is the pasuk that in some ways, I'm going to complicate this in a minute, but in some ways really launches Abraham's journey. And it is the opening verse of Parashat Lech Lecha, which we read just a couple of weeks ago. Vayomer Adonai el Avram, at this point he's still Avram, not yet Avraham. Lech Lecha me'artzecha umimoletecha umibeit avicha el haaretz asher ar'eka. The Lord said to Avram, go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. Now this is, in some sense, sets up Avraham as the paradigmatic figure of forward motion. In some ways, Avraham is the paradigm of forward motion. And in fact, the root, that you see here in this verse with Lech Lecha, the command, go forth, that root, Vayelech, Halach, Lech Lecha, shows up, I think about a dozen times, even in just the opening verses of this parsha, and shows up all over Abraham's journey. Abraham is he's a mover. In fact, I sometimes think when I read this this section, when I read this parsha, I think about something that my here, I'll come off screen for a second so you can see me. So come off the screen share. So when my husband and I first met about 30 years ago now, he said to me that his family sort of had a motto, which was set yourself in motion and things will happen to you. And at the time I responded and said, my family doesn't really have a motto, but I think if we had a motto, it might be stand perfectly still and maybe, God willing, nothing will happen to you. Sort of thing. So, there's, I think, some ambivalence around this notion of forward motion, but certainly Abraham embodies it in a way that we really see as sort of central not only to his actual, physical travels, but to his spiritual travels as well. And in fact, that's what the next text I wanted to share picks up on. And I think this is, one of the most beautiful and strongest articulations of this idea. This is from a Hasidic master, the Sfat Emet, Rabbi Yehuda Leib Alter of Ger, so the second part of the 19th century. And he picks up on this theme of Abraham as a walker, and actually sees him as paradigmatic not only of the Jewish spiritual journey, but really, he says in the Hebrew here, Sha'adam nikra mehalech. Part of what it means to be a human being is to be a walker. He goes on to say, I'm reading here now from the text in front of you, always having to go mi madrega le madrega, always having to go from one rung to another. For habit makes things seem natural. And this sense of quote unquote nature, like that's just the way things are, hides the inner light. This is true even of Torah and the commandments. When we do them out of habit, simply in a rote fashion, they become our nature and we forget their inward meaning, right? This is kind of a classic Hasidic critique of rote practice, mitzvat anashim milumada, and says, no, we actually have to not habituate ourselves, but we have to somehow transcend that sense of them being habit or them being nature. And he connects this to the verse actually that Rabbi Meadows just quoted in the previous session. He connects this to, therefore the Blessed Holy One renews each day the work of creation. The person has to search and seek out this renewal. And this is how the Sfat Emet reads, Lech lecha me'artzecha, not just a physical journey, but a spiritual journey. The Sfat Emet says, what does get you out of your land mean? It means a person should always keep walking. El ha'aretz asher areka, to that which I will show you, always some new attainment. This is why the person is called a walker. Whoever stands still is not renewed, for nature holds him fast. And then he makes an interesting point. This is picking up on various midrashim. The angels above are beyond nature. They can be said to stand. He draws on Isaiah, but this is actually an idea in other places in rabbinic tradition, that angels have one shlichut, they have one purpose for which they're sent. You could say they stand still, but part of what it means to be a human being is to keep walking, to keep moving. Okay, so the Sfat Emet really sets this up very powerfully as sort of part of the essence of what Abraham embodies and bequeaths to us as Jews and as religious human beings. Now, before we move to some texts around Lot's wife, I want to just, and her sort of as a seemingly representing kind of an opposite image here, I actually want to just complicate this image of Abraham's journey, because I think it's so easy for us to just pick up that journey from the beginning of Parashat Lech Lecha, from this verse. God said to Abram, go forth from your native land and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. It's easy for us to pick it up there almost and think of it almost as sort of starting from a clean slate or from a blank page, right? That this is a radical separation from his past, and he is moving forward from there and not looking back. But the text, it kind of hidden within the text is, I think, are some hints of a little bit more complexity than that to Abraham's journey and his relationship to his past. And in order to get at that, we have to just go back and look at what comes right before that verse at the beginning of Parshat Lech Lecha, right? So Parshat Lech Lecha is the beginning of chapter 12. It's verse 1 of chapter 12. But if you go back to the previous Parsha and look at the very end of chapter 11, watch, what we find in the genealogy there and in the description of what Abram is leaving behind. So here, can people come off? Would somebody like to read these verses, or should I keep reading? Amy, you tell me what. Is it okay to ask for a volunteer to read? Great. Dean, since you introduced me, can I put you on the spot?
Happy to oblige.
Great.
Now this is the line of Terach. Terach begot Abram, Nachor, and Haran. And Haran begot Lot. Haran died in the lifetime in the presence of his father Terach, in his native land, Ur, of the Chaldeans. Avram and Nachor took to themselves wives, the name of Avram's wife being Sarai, and that of Nachor's wife, Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was barren, she had no child. Terach took his son Avram, his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, and his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Avram, and they set out together from Ur of the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan. But when they had come as far as Haran, they settled there. The days of Terach came to 205 years, and Terach died in Haran.
Okay, thank you. And then it moves right into immediately the next verse, even though we have a break in the Parsha, immediately the next verse is, the Lord said to Abram, go forth from your native land. So thank you so much for that reading, Dean. And can I ask, if anybody notices anything strange about this, when we bring in the context of these previous verses, what questions do these verses raise for you about the command to Avram at the beginning of chapter 12? Chris.
So it's interesting that the start of Lech Lecha says, go forth from your native land, from your father's house. But it seems as though in the previous paragraph that they had already come out of their native land. They'd come to Haran from Ur, right?
They'd come from Ur and gotten as far as Haran. Yes. Beautiful, right? And it's right there. And we tend to, very often we just kind of skip over that part. But what that means is that when Avram gets the call, Lech Lecha, it seems to be that he is getting a call to continue a journey that his father has already started, right? And so that's just an interesting, subtle shift in terms of how we think about this intergenerational moment, this familial moment, this moment in Avram's personal religious journey, right? The difference between saying, leave everything behind, everything you've always, and everyone you've always known behind, and saying somehow your father has taken you this far, and now you're going to complete? Are you starting out on a new journey? Are you completing a journey that he was not able to complete for some reason? Right, so it introduces some complexity there to what's happening in this moment. I'm just looking to see if there's another hand. So let me just point out two other things and then we'll keep going. But related to sort of the presence here of both, I mean, it's a very future-oriented moment, right? Go forth. But in these verses that come right before it, we also have there are some real traces of grief and loss and longing, right? And one wonders whether that is not part of what propels Terach on the journey to begin with, Terach and Avram and Sarai, right? So the first moment of loss, of course, is this mysterious death of Haran, Avram's brother, who dies before his father. He dies, al pnei Terach. Some very troubling midrashim about what happened in that moment, which we're not going to go into right now. But so the first thing that we read about that may have somehow propelled the family on this journey is the loss of Haran. But then we also read that Sarai was barren. That's what comes immediately before Terach sets out, right? Sarah's barrenness, which is also a barrenness, is in Torah such a trope, a touchstone for sort of the experience of longing, and also the experience of specifically longing for a future that is uncertain. They're not sure, they're not sure they have a future. And so somehow that seems to be part of what propels Terach forward with the family. And then the one other thing I want to highlight, just in the language here, and it's, feels like maybe a hint, maybe not, we could argue about it, but Terach gets stuck in Haran, which isn't exactly the same word as the name of his son who died, Haran. But one has to wonder if there's not some suggestion here that Terach got stuck in the place of his grief for the son who he had lost, that had something to do, on the one hand, with what started him on his journey, and on the other hand, with what did not allow him to complete it. Okay. So I want to, we'll have some time for comments and questions, but let me get a few more texts on the table here, and let's now turn our attention for a moment. And this is, on the one hand, not a juxtaposition that is directly made in the text, but these are these images both are with us in the same parsha, and to my mind, it's hard to think about this paradigm of Abraham's journey forward without contrasting it to this image of Lot's wife, who looks backwards and turns into a pillar of salt. So I wanted to just zero in for a moment on that verse. Vatabet ishto me'acharav vatihi nitziv melach. And I included the visual partly because there are actually midrashim that very directly connect this image of Lot's wife turning into a pillar of salt to pillars that can be seen to this day, sort of in the desert. So So just to remind us, this takes place a little bit further along in Avram's journey and in the family's journey, and after Avram has argued, ultimately unsuccessfully, for Sodom and Gomorrah to be saved, and the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed, and we're told as the destruction is about to take place, the messengers who had been sent to the city, the angels, urge Lot and his family to leave, saying, and they're speaking directly to Lot here, saying, "Up, take your wife and your 2 remaining daughters, lest you be swept away because of the iniquity of the city." The city, by the way, the overwhelming force of the Midrashic tradition in rabbinic literature is that the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah center around a radical absence of chesed, around greed, around an unwillingness to care for the stranger, care for the poor. There are, heart-wrenching midrashim about people, including one of Lot's daughters, who try to act with chesed and try to take care of the vulnerable in the city, take care of the hungry, take care of the poor, and are executed for it. So that's what the overwhelming weight of rabbinic commentaries sees as sort of the central nature of the evil of the city, the sin of the city. So they're told to leave. Still, he delayed. Lot delayed. We have that wonderful trope that, he's having trouble moving forward. But he does. And the men, these angels, seized his hand and the hands of his wife and 2 daughters in the Lord's mercy on him, and brought him out and left him outside the city. When they had brought him outside, one said, "Flee for your life. Do not look behind you, nor stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the hills, lest you be swept away." Do not look behind you. That's the command. Keep moving forward. And then, of course, we know that Lot's wife does look back. And just a couple of verses later, as the sun rose upon the earth and Lot entered Zoar, the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah sulfurous fire from the Lord out of heaven. He annihilated those cities and the entire plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and the vegetation of the ground. Lot's wife, no name biblically, by the way, Eshet Lot's wife, looked back, and she thereupon turned into a pillar of salt. So I want to note here, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. I want to note, for full disclosure, that the vast majority of rabbinic commentaries about Lot's wife are pretty harsh and see her turning into a pillar of salt as a punishment, various associations are made that she turns into. Rashi picks up on one of the most famous midrashim, that she turns into a pillar of salt because she sinned by salt, that she revealed to the neighbors that they had these messengers visiting them by going and asking for salt, and so in that way endangered the lives of the messengers. There are a variety of different ways of understanding what she's been being punished for, but most of the classical commentaries see her turning into a pillar of salt as a punishment. Some see it as a punishment for disobeying the command, disobeying Lot, etc. Even the more, there are some that are a little more compassionate, but still see this as really reflecting a sensibility that is the antithesis of the forward motion that we were talking about before with Avraham, right? That Avraham kind of embodies that aspect of longing that is about hope, right? Takes his loss, takes his search and moves forward with it, and is willing to step into the unknown and willing to follow God's command and willing to and able to just keep moving forward. And that Eshet Lot is not. One could almost, in a more compassionate reading, but still in that paradigm, sometimes I think about the image of her turning into a pillar of salt as turning into a pillar of tears, but without waterless tears, right? Tears without the water that actually allows grief to flow through us so that we can continue to move forward. So, there's, I think, such a poignant and tragic dimension to Lot's wife in that sense, even if you don't read it punitively. We know and can recognize that sometimes as part of the reality of grief, the inability to let it, to be able somehow for it to flow through us so that we can move forward, and that sort of getting stuck in that place. But even that, I want to complicate a little bit, and I think it's fair to do it. I think there's language in the text that allows us to complicate it a little bit more. I will say here, I am motivated to complicate it partly because I'm with Kurt Vonnegut in this a little bit. I don't know if people know. He mentions Lot's wife in Slaughterhouse-Five, and he has this great quote where he says, "Lot's wife, of course, was told not to look back where all those people and their homes had been, but she did look back, and I love her for that." This is Vonnegut writing. "I love her for that because it was so human. So she was turned into a pillar of salt. So it goes." That's the end of the Vonnegut quote. So, but I want to sort of interrogate that a little bit further by looking at the root of the word that's used to describe what she turns into. So if the Hebrew root that is associated possibly more than any other with Avraham is lech, vayelech, halach, all the forms of walking and moving forward, the Hebrew root that's associated with Lot's wife here is nitzav, nitzavim. She turns into a nitziv melach, a pillar of salt. But that root nitziv, nitzavta, nitzavim, is actually a really interesting root in Torah that shows up in a bunch of very interesting places. We're not going to look at all of them, but I want to look at a few of them. That root, which means to stand still, right? And a matzeva is a monument. So it's as opposed to Avraham's motion, there is Lot's wife's stillness. But the root netziv, I think, holds more than just a simple sort of hardened understanding of standing still. I think it's a word for standing and for stillness that actually holds within it longing, witnessing, presence, and even hope. So that's the the case I want to make a little bit by looking at just a few other places where the root shows up, and then bringing in a commentary, a sort of a modern midrash that really takes it to a next level. So let me pull up the source sheet again and just move, and we really will move through these different stories fairly quickly, but just with the dagesh, with the emphasis on how and where this root connected to Nitziv, this root Nitzav shows up. So it shows up a few chapters later in Genesis when Abraham has sent his servant Eliezer to find a wife for Yitzhak, and he has sent him actually, notably back to the place that his family came from, back to the city of Nahor, which, remember, is the name of both his grandfather and his brother. And look at where it shows up here. The servant took 10 of his master's camels and set out, taking with him all the bounty of his master, and he made his way to Aram Naharaim, to the city of Nahor. He made the camels kneel down by the well outside the city at evening time, the time when women come out to draw water. And he said, O Lord God of my master Abraham, Hine anochi nitzav al ein hamayim. Here I stand by the spring, as the daughters of the townsmen come out to draw water. And then famously, this is how he identifies Rivka, this is how he identifies Rebecca as the right match for Yitzchak. Let the maiden to whom I say, please lower your jar that I may drink, and who replies, drink and I will also water your camels, right? The enactment of chesed there in that phrase. Let her be the one whom you have decreed for your servant Yitzchak. Hine anochi nitzav al ein hamayim. Here I stand by the spring. I hear again in this root nitzav, it's a standing, but I think you can feel, in this moment, you can feel that it's anything but a passive kind of standing, right? Standing at the edge of the spring. It's a standing that is pregnant with yearning and expectation and hope for finding, the right partner for Yitzchak, who will then be able to carry the line forward. Somehow Eliezer knows this is a point in the journey, not to keep moving, but to stand still, to pause in this place, not to keep walking, but to wait and to pay very close attention to who shows up and what they say and how they act. So that's the first appearance of Nitzav that I wanted to just highlight. A next appearance of the root, another sort of touchstone moment where this root appears is in the first chapters of the book of Shmot, in the first chapters of the book of Exodus. Again, familiar moment to all of us. A certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. This is talking about the birth of Moshe. The woman conceived, this is Yocheved, and bore a son, Moshe. And when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket for him and caulked it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child into it and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister, now we're talking about Miriam, Vatetatzav achoto merachok. The same verb shows up here. His sister stationed herself at a distance, stood at a distance to learn what would befall him. So again, the same root that's connected to Nitziv, connected to Nitzav, but again, a moment where somehow that root has to do with a kind of standing, positioning oneself, stationing oneself, standing strong. There's a real sense of presence, but also of waiting and watching carefully for what might happen. And in Miriam's case, not only waiting and watching for who might show up, and of course it's Pharaoh's daughter who shows up, not only waiting and watching for who might show up, but then being prepared to take action that will help shape the future, not only of Moshe and the family, but of the nation, right? So it's again this root, this verb for standing that is just so full of possibility and so full of longing and hope in this case, in a very, very desperate situation. This child has just been put on the Nile in a basket. Okay. I'm going to skip the next one because I want to be sure to bring in the contemporary midrash that I wanted to share. Just since it feels too prominent to not make note of it, right? Probably the most famous appearance of this root, Nitzavim, is the name of one of the parshiot towards the end of Devarim. And here it is us. It is we who are Nitzavim, right? Atem Nitzavim hayom kulchem. You stand this day, all of you, before the Lord your God. Your tribal heads, your elders, and your officials, all the men of Israel, your children, your wives, even the stranger within your camp, from woodchopper to water drawer, to enter into the covenant of the Lord your God. I make this covenant not with you alone, but both with those who are standing here with us this day before the Lord our God, and with those who are not with us here this day. Right, so this is another place where this word shows up, Nitzavim, and there is a sense really made explicit here in the text that it's a kind of standing that in which past, present, and future are all held in this poignant moment of covenantal presence. Okay, so this is where Rabbi Sandy Sasso takes us in a beautiful midrash that she offers called The Tale of Edith and the Passover Paradox. She goes back to this root Nitziv Melach, pillar of salt, this root that means monument here, but that means standing still, but with a stillness that contains so much. And she connects it back to Lot's wife's standing in that moment. You'll notice that here Lot's wife doesn't have a name in the Torah. She's just Eshet Lot. In a lot of rabbinic midrash, she does have a name. She's given the name Edith, which one could midrashically connect to the word for witnessing, edut, aid. So this is how Rabbi Sasso understands Edith's witnessing, longing, and the promise that she ultimately holds out for us of renewal. So often before, Edith had followed Lot and had not turned back. This time was different. This time she turned back, her heart swollen with compassion for her daughters, who were left, two of whom were left behind. She looked back out of mother love to see if they were following. She lingered out of sympathy, out of lament for human life destroyed. She turned out of regret and anguish for life's grandeur wasted. Her turning was also a question, like Abraham's to God. Is this the birthing of redemption or the world's final Kaddish? She turned and beheld the back of the divine presence and was consumed in tears. Were her tears for Sodom or for God? No one saw with Edith's eyes the wrath of God poured upon stone. Only her daughters bore witness to the reflection in their mother's eyes. From the descendants of Edith's daughters, we're told, and this the Torah tells us, came Ruth, the great-grandmother of David, Naamah, the mother of Rehoboam, and from these kings we are told the promise of Mashiach, the promise of Messiah. Tradition records the day of Edith's death on the 16th of the month of Nisan, the time when centuries later Israel would be freed. Sorry about that typo, would be freed from Egyptian bondage. And then here's what Rabbi Sasso says: when Edith confronts in all its ugliness that which brings death and destruction, she refuses to give her consent, to turn away, to follow the vision of another's eye and the path of another's foot. She becomes a witness. We have become accustomed to seeing the pillar of salt on a barren plain as an eternal symbol of punishment for disobedience. In light of Edith's story, that pillar becomes a monument of tears. The tears of Edith, an eternal symbol of loving kindness. Edith's daughters saw her act of love and her defiance. They saw the way of Edith, the recovery of the soul with a raging kindness. From the descendants of the daughters of Edith comes the promise of Messiah. So I wanted to, we only, I think, have just a couple of minutes left, yeah. I've put a lot out there. I am wondering if anyone would like to reflect briefly on the question of either just respond to anything that I've said or ask questions about what I've said, but particularly reflect on this image of Avram moving forward, Edith looking back. How in both of these, is there anything that offers us a way to think about what it means to hold grief and hope at sort of in one heart, which is what we have to do all the time. So I just love to hear any reflections that anyone wants to share. It could be a question, it could be a brief reflection, and then I'll end with just a very short piece of a poem by Yehuda Amichai. Janice, was that a hand? Are you able to unmute?
Yeah. Okay. Say your question again. I just forgot.
Yeah, just what these two images of Abraham and Edith suggest to you, if anything, about sort of the work of holding on to grief and hope at the same time.
I think you need both. It suggests that you need to hold on to the back, to what's behind, to keep your memories, to hold fast your memories. Mm-hmm. Okay, that just because they're gone doesn't mean that you don't remember them. But you have to move forward from your grief and move on in order to have a life and not be mired in your grief. It's important to move on.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dean, Dean and David, and then we'll probably need to.
Well, just briefly then, I think you have brought to your shiur maybe the essence for me of recovery from as a survivor from an attack, the loss of dearly beloved friend and community members as well, and looking back in grief and love and wanting to bring as much of that as I can with me forward into the future. But at the same time, how do we make something lasting, important, beautiful, to transform those feelings without losing them, but create some better future? And I was heartened by the Eradicate Hate summit that was held here this week. I think that's a broad movement internationally that has a lot of hope, but just within our own community, each of us are working and struggling and hoping and trying to create something that can celebrate memory and share love of those we've lost, those who mean so much to us still. Thank you for.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And I will just say, I think that I said it more beautifully than I can. And I think this is over and over and over again what Torah asks us to do, which is take these things that are the sort of the most challenging central paradoxes, tensions of our lives, of our condition as human beings, and says to us, don't flatten either side of it, because you'll flatten your humanity if you do, so don't try to flatten the grief in order to move forward in hope, and don't flatten the hope and stay in the grief, and hold them both. It's just, so hard to do and so important.
I have the very difficult timekeeper job, and
Yes.
We'll let David Kelson speak, and then we are going to have closing and a closing Kaddish de Rabbanan, and after that, if people want to stand for a few minutes and talk to each other, if Rabbi Anisfeld is available, I want to be respectful of her time, but just for a few minutes, perhaps till 6 o'clock or something, we can hear from other people. So David.
I was struck by the fact that Terach took the family to Haran.
Yeah.
And it was when Terach died that God said to Avram, go forth from your native land. I feel that the admonition was, it's not just standing still, but don't look back, don't look behind. You may have this yearning. You were taken to Haran to go back to Ur. Don't even think about it. It's time to move forward. That's how I saw the juxtaposition of those two phrases. Even stronger.
Even stronger. Yeah, I will, if we have a minute after, I'll complicate that even further, but yeah, because it's interesting. Yeah. In the chat, I'm thinking of the two triangles that make up the Magen David, the active tension in the middle between God and humanity. Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you.
So Rabbi,
I
want you to conclude with your poem, with how you want to wrap up.
Just this couplet, and then we'll move into, I just will leave you with the words of Yehuda Amichai, who is the master of holding paradox. This is from a poem, a fragment from a poem called The Precision of Pain and the Blurriness of Joy, the Touch of Longing is Everywhere. And he says, when tears yearn not for laughter, nor for the eyes that wept them, nor for the cheeks they wet, but for the sea, for the salt in the sea, these are the true longings. Which I will just say, maybe part of this mystery is to connect, I feel like what he's getting at, to connect our own tears, our own longings, the salt of our own lives to the sea that we're all a part of.
Can you repeat the name of the poem, or at least the first part of it?
The name of the poem it's from his last book called Open, Closed, Open. The poem is "The Precision of Pain and the Blurriness of Joy. The touch of longing is everywhere."
Well, I want to really thank Rabbi Anisfeld for your teaching today. I've kept top secret that she and I are old friends. And because she's an old friend, I haven't heard her teach Torah, of course, in many, many years. And what a pleasure and solace and comfort to hear this particular shiur. I want to thank all of you who took time on this difficult day to participate in Torah study with us. And we are going to be closing with Kaddish D'Rabbanan. If you don't have it handy, I do have a link to in the chat. I'm going to ask everybody but Miri to mute yourselves. Kaddish D'Rabbanan is going to be led by Dor Chadash member Miri Rabinowitz in memory of her dear husband, Dr. Jerry Rabinowitz, Zichrono Livracha, who was killed in the attack 3 years ago. Miri.
Thank you, Rabbi Bardak, and very much thank you, Rabbi Anisfeld. That really was a beautiful and meaningful teaching. Yitgadal v'yikadash shemei Rabba ba'alma divrachu te v'yamlich malchute b'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayed chol beit Yisrael ba'agala v'zman kari v'imru amen. Yehei shmei Rabba mevarach le'olam u'omei u'maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shnei dekudasha brichu le'elamin kol birchata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechamata da'amiran ba'alma v'imru amen. Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Tamidehon v'al Tamidei Tamidehon v'al kol man da'askin ba'oraita divarata Hadin v'div b'chol atar v'atar, Yehe lachon u'lachon shlama rabba, China v'chista v'rachamin, V'chayin arichin, Umzoneh v'vichei, Uvharkana min kadam avuhun, Di v'shemaya v'ar'a, V'yimru, Amen. Yehe shlama rabba min shemaya, V'chayim tovim aleinu ve'el kol Yisrael yimru amen. Oseh shalom b'momav, hu barachamav yaseh shalom, aleinu ve'el kol Yisrael ve'el kol yoshvei tevel v'yimru amen.
Yasher koach, Miri, thank you so much.